So it's in this moment that I know, I feel, I claim my oneness with all there is. I am of that oneness. I am of that spirit, which is all there is. And so if it's all there is, I have to be one with it. Mm-hmm. All that goodness, I have to be. I have to be. Each of us has to be. There's no other place to be. There's no outside this. There's no away. There's no missing parts. There's no absences. It's all God. It's all spirit. It's all energy. It's all love. It's all that. It's all this infinite capacity, creation, growth, ongoing movement. And that is me, and that is each of us. So I'm grateful to know this because there are times when I don't feel it. So I lean back into that truth. Trust the truth because I've seen it over and over again. I had to write this down this morning. In these moments, I turn to the infinite mind for possibilities and I say yes. Yes, yes, yes. To even the possibilities I haven't thought of yet. In answer to what's going on in the world, what's going on in my heart, I say yes to the possibilities. Open to more good. I can be open to less good, but I'm going to choose to be open to more good. And I don't have to know how that happens. I don't have to know. In fact, it's not my job to know how. That is God's job. That is Spirit's job to know how more good happens. My job is to look for it and be willing to receive it. Being open and willing to receive. So I put my willingness into the law and I receive goodness out of the law because it's a flow. Flow doesn't happen just starting here and going forward. It's a through me. I am the way. I don't have my glasses on, sorry. I am the way this will manifest. David is the way this will manifest. George is the way this will manifest. Maria is the way this will manifest. You name the name, it will manifest through each of us. As each of us. Because when I operate in that flow, I am receiving as well as giving. So when I say it's all good, it's because it feels awfully good. I feel good knowing that flow is happening through and as me, even when it might not look like it on the outside. It's still there. God's still there. It's all God. It's all good. And so it is.
We've been looking this whole year at the idea of growing deeper and rising higher. And that's putting our roots deep in the ground so that we can blossom and bloom even more. So we're taking a look today at this whole month at the paradox of oneness. That oneness itself, which is paradoxical, because oneness itself is simultaneously this and what seems like the opposite this. Yes? Have you noticed? Yes. If you haven't noticed, it is anyways. So the first two talks in this series, Fear is Faith and Bondage is Freedom, called for us to examine how we use the freedom and the power of our thinking and our creativity to experience something. So can we create greater freedom instead of bondage, or do we use the absolute freedom we have of choice to create ourselves in a stuck place over and over and over again as we go kicking and screaming down the path of transformation? So how are we using that through our thinking and our application? Ernest Holmes says our movement will rise or fall, and it will rise on what happens to the people in it, that's you and me, not what they talk about, not how loud they scream. It will depend entirely upon what happens to the individual life and what happens to those who come to our practitioners and leaders for help. Our movement depends entirely on the practice of our science, which is a way of saying it's not enough to just know about. Oh yeah, I got all this knowledge. You know, how many of you went to college for a long time and got a whole lot of knowledge, or maybe you just went to high school, grade school, and got a whole lot of knowledge? It's not just that, it's how do I apply it, right? How do I live it? So last week and this week, we begin to see the simultaneous existence and our existence within what have been interpreted as two separate ideas. So last week, realizing that time exists within the timeless, a fairly convoluted talk, but we got to a place. And then today we're exploring the relationship between what we label, and I want to emphasize, what we label as the relative and the absolute. Because in the absolute, there's no labels, right? It doesn't perceive anything different than itself. Or what we label as the material and the spiritual. And many of us were taught that these were two separate, very separate things, yes? We had quotes like, you can't serve God and mammon, which sort of says that the spiritual is good and the earthly and the relative is bad, right? Many of us who grew up in certain religions got that. At the extreme of that is people who live completely in the relative, who look at the spiritual and go, that's not realistic. This is real. If I can't see it, touch it, feel it, it's not real. And so either way is living in one or the other, separate from. So we create separation and judgment between the two, but if, as we teach, God is all there is, then the two can't be separate. They can only be aspects or ways to experience the oneness. Yes? We're just experiencing it. And until we are clear about this, we'll live conflicted lives, equating good with the spiritual and the absolute realm, and bad with the material, or vice versa. And we seek to escape, I kind of wrote this from, if we're looking at it from the spiritual realm, we'll seek to escape the relative realm, the earthly realm, by going to heaven, or getting off of the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth, or awaiting a second coming, or a rapture, or some other fantasies such as those, and practice self-loathing and other loathing, because of course we're human, and if human is bad, then if I'm human, that means what? Yeah. Some of you have heard of original sin and all that stuff. Yeah. Breathe. Instead of recognizing what all spiritual teachers have taught, which is that heaven, enlightenment, whatever it is already here now. We just don't see it, but it's here now. And often when people first get into this kind of teaching or become aware of this kind of teaching, one of the things that throws them is they hear a phrase like, God is good. And they say, wait, time out. No, look at this list. I got this list of all the ways God is not good. This is not good. And not understanding the difference between speaking in terms of the absolute, which is the level in which God is good and only good, the purely spiritual, the purely cosmic, whatever you want to call it, and the relative, which is infinite oneness expressing in form. Emerson said, it is only the finite that is wrought and suffered, the infinite lies in smiling repose. And that's a wonderful expression of the relationship of the relative in which we live and the absolute. So in the absolute, all is well, all is good. In the relative, not always is our experience, yes? So we're called to recognize simultaneously that at the level of pure spirit, God is good, goodness itself, and that, as we saw in our first two talks, people use this infinite freedom, this infinite good to create crap. Yes? To create some really unpleasant, quote, bad experiences. And then we combine that with the fact that life, capital L life, which we're all living in, yeah, you've noticed. If you haven't noticed, you're living in life. That life in the relative level doesn't always work in the ways we want it too. Such as the people and things die before we want them to, whether they're 6 months or 106 years old, yes? Things don't always work out. We say that change is the only constant in the universe, and the level of which change happens is in the relative. There's also said change happens within the changeless. And so at the absolute level, the absolute is changeless. It is just being itself. But the way it shows up in form is always changing and shifting and growing and evolving and becoming something different. And dang it, we hate change, yes? I know ministers who've been fired because they came into a new community and did away with the closing song that they've been singing for 20 years. And this wonderful community that says, change your thinking, change your life. That's our motto, kind of one of our old mottos. And somebody comes in and says, let's change. They say, oh, no, not us. Not there. Can't do that. Death is one of those things that kind of challenges some of us in religious science, because some people in religious science, because they sit there and go, well, I know that the person hasn't died, but I miss them. And what we have to experience is that simultaneously, in the absolute level, the essence of who they are still continues on, is ageless, deathless, timeless. That is the truth of them. And at the same time, in this physical level, in this relative level, in this human level, in the personality level, they are no longer here, and we can feel sad. And so it's simultaneously being able to grieve and feel sad, while at the same time knowing that at another level, that still continues on and they're still in existence. And it's okay to do both. And it's a challenge of, can I hold both at the same time? Can I feel sadness and joy simultaneously? And not make either one wrong? And not separate myself from either one? And so it's living in and realizing the absolute and the relative as both existing, both true, both being real. And we're here as the oneness in form to live in and experience both. Edwin Gaines, who was a Unity prosperity teacher, still is the Unity prosperity teacher as far as I know, used to talk about finding your purpose in life. And she would say, find your purpose and do it as though the entire world depends on it, while simultaneously realizing it doesn't. What a place to hold, yes? Ernest Holmes used to say, I don't take myself seriously, but I take this work seriously. And so having that looseness, having that spaciousness, having that lightness and yet intensity, this passion, at the same time, is what we're called to do, is how we're called to live, because that's how the oneness is living. So we know the life essence of each person continues on infinitely. And we're not stuck in either or. We're not stuck in there, it's this or it's that. Where we get in trouble is when we get lost in one or the other, and as though the only way or the only realm is to try to live in one or the other. Again, believing in separation. So in either or, and instead of both, we live in either or, instead of both and. And then we see people living, when we get locked in one, when we get locked in the absolute and the spiritual only, that's where we see what we call spiritual bypass. Everything is wonderful and it's all good, la, 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 la. My house just burned down, I lost my dog, my wife ran off with my truck, but it's all good. La, la, la. And that's bypassing the human experience. Or we can get locked into the relative only. Look at how bad everything is. Only. Which keeps us outside of the spaciousness and the perspective of the spiritual. And for us to live fully is to live in both simultaneously, which is what we're doing anyways in reality, but becoming aware of that and knowing and catching ourselves when we're off it, when we're caught in one or the other, allowing ourselves to let that come together and be all of that expressed within us. So the nature of the absolute is to incarnate, to take form, to flow from being into becoming. From just being into becoming, into becoming something just for the joy of its own movement, as Ernest Holmes says. He says, everything is impregnated with a universal nature and set on its journey of eternal evolution or unfoldment, already endowed and equipped with all it needs. You and I are on our journey of form with all we ever need. Just like if last November or October you planted a bunch of tulip bulbs, like many of us did, you didn't have to endow them with something else. You didn't have to sit there and keep on working with them to say that, no, they're already endowed with everything they need, that in perfect timing and in perfect conditions, they will show up as tulips or daffodils or whatever it is that they're for, yes? And so that's how we are. We have everything we already need. We don't have to go find something else. We have to simply become aware of that we are already whole, perfect, and complete, while simultaneously being really messed up. Yes? I'll speak for myself anyways. You guys aren't, but. So we're called to realize, we're called to live and to realize that everything, Spirit is incarnated in everything, not just human beings, everything. The chair you're sitting on, the rocks outside, the trees outside, all of it is this divine, infinite presence in form. And we are individual expressions of a unity, of a oneness that exists without destroying the unity from which we emerged. Huh? Say that again. Yeah. Or separating the diverse ways that have emerged. This is an earnestism. So in other words, we are individuals within a oneness, within a unity, having never left that oneness. But our individuality doesn't destroy the unity, doesn't separate us from the unity, and the unity isn't something that's more sacred than our individuality. Got it? Sora. So we have the privilege and the challenge of experiencing ourselves and all of life as both individual forms, while at the same time at one with all that is. Okay? So you and I are individual forms. You've noticed that, yes? Nudge the person next to you and say, just notice that they exist. Okay, yeah, they're an individual form that's a little bit, different than you. Yeah? Okay? At the same time, guess what? We're all one. Just us in this room, by the way, not the folks outside this room. No, not them. No, it's all one. It's all the oneness. If we recognize that, we don't have to start judging it. We simply say, oh, look at the beauty of that person. Oh, look at the unusualness of that flower. Yes? If we treat each other as flowers, some of us might be deadly nightshade, which has its use, or skunk cabbage. And others of us are, it's like daffodils. Daffodils, will, if you put them in a vase with other plants, will kill the other plants. Right? And they're a wonderful thing to plant because deer don't like them. But they're perfect and whole as they are. I used to say that a rattlesnake is a wonderful, beautiful creation of life. When I was camping, Shani had just traveled to the Anza Borrego Desert outside of, to the east of Los Angeles, San Diego area, and reminded me of being in the desert and being in the presence of where rattlesnakes are. And it's like they're beautiful beings if you ever actually watch them. You just don't want to have one crawl into your sleeping bag. You don't want to sleep with one, okay? But they're perfect. We just have to understand the nature of our interaction, our relationship with them. So we're living in this life that is one with all that it is, and we must realize that without our say-so, life is always evolving itself into what it is going to become. Not because there's some big guy in the sky with a divine plan, I got this all worked out ahead of time, but because there are cosmic tendencies towards more life, more freedom, more love, more wholeness. That is the tendency of the cosmos, because that is the nature of the absolute. It is replicating and expressing itself, and we can either flow with this, or we can go kicking and screaming down this path of life. But guess what? We're going anyway. So you might as well enjoy it. Lao Tzu said, how can you follow the course of your life if you do not let it flow? How can you follow the course of your life, the river of your life, if you don't let it flow? So how do we let life flow? First, we have to recognize that the relative is a reflection and an expression of the absolute, and that the absolute cannot create anything unlike itself. Yes? There is nothing else but the absolute, so there's nothing but the oneness, so it can't create something that's not itself. Okay, we got it. Which means that whether we see it or not, live it or not, this human experience, the relative, is the divine expressing and experiencing in form that we are God in form. Nudge your neighbor and say, you are God in form, and so am I. And again, whether we remember or forget that, and what we call our journey, which is really life's journey happening in, through, and as us, because in the cosmic level, there's no me and there's no you. Breathe. Ernest reminds us there's only one mind. We all use it. And then we think we're separate from it. And we got a separate little mind. But that's sort of like, the metaphor I like is there's only one internet, and we all use it. There's not a whole bunch of, a billion internets out there all attached, each one different for each computer. No, there's one internet. There's one infinite source of knowledge. There's one infinite source of being. There's one capital M mind. We all use it. We are all expressions of it. So let go of the idea that there's just me and start to recognize that it's all we. It's all us. And so our journey, our life's journey through and as us is remembering and awakening to its own nature. In our teaching, Ernest says that we teach the presence. We teach this nature of the divine, what it is. Oftentimes when we come into this teaching, we've come from other religions, other teachings that we have to heal from of what God is, yes? The first thing we have to get is it's not Santa Claus sitting up in the sky keeping a list of who's naughty and nice and going to punish you for eternity if you're not. We disperse that. So we teach the presence, the capital P presence, and we practice the principle. We have to know about it, and then we have to practice it. We have to make it practical. We have to bring it to that level right there. We remember our true nature, God in form, and apply that to our human experience. And this is what the whole process of spiritual mind treatment or any other form of prayer, whether it's bargaining with or beseeching some divine deity or saint, it's recognizing that there's a good for me and I ought to have it that's beyond what I have now, yes? Whatever my current situation is, if I'm praying for something else, I'm recognizing there's a good beyond what I already have. Whatever process we use, it's still the same thing in our mind saying, I'm going for that. I want to open to that. We recognize that God is good, and good is God no matter what words we use nor how we define good. And by the way, we all define good in our own unique way, yes? And so then finally I invite us to become aware that this is a range of existence. It isn't just the relative and just the absolute and nothing in between. It's a range. Thich Nhat Hanh says we have 8 bodies. He defines body as a collection of energy. We have 8 bodies ranging from the human to the cosmic body in which we exist. Take a breath. He joked that one of his students said to him, oh my God, now I'm going to have to take 8 showers a day to cleanse each of my bodies every day. He said he didn't have to. The main thing to realize is that we're not stuck in just one level of existence. All of this is the absolute in relative form. All of this is God in human form. Take a breath and remember that again. I am God in human form. I am this infinite love, this infinite presence, this infinite good in human form. And it might not feel good at the moment, right? But the good is still here. And that life, although it's not always likable, which means showing up the way that I want it to, I like life when it shows up the way that I want it to, yes? How about you? Okay? We all, unless we kind of really step back from that, it's how we want it to. Life is always good, capital G good, And it's revealing a much longer and larger process than we can see happening. We've all had the experience of something bad happens, and then 10 years down the road, we look back and say, oh, now I can see how that worked better for my life than had that not happened. Yes? And that's the practice. So life is always good. It's revealing a much longer the process than we may be able to see from our limited perspective. I can only see so far. You can only see so far. So our practice then is to trust life. Trust, capital L, life. And to practice really seeing the divine in the human, without denying the human in and as the divine. So not only are you God in form, but God is you in form. It's the same. And then to live from our knowing the absolute into the relative human form. From living from that, I know that all there is good here, and I'm going to allow that to show up here in this aspect of my life. Even if I don't know how yet. I'm still going to say yes to that greater love, yes to that greater good, and I'm going to allow it, and it knows how. I don't have to figure it out. That's where we get stuck. I only know this much, and if I can't see it, then it's not going to happen. This is the fly banging against the window. This is the only way through. This is the only way through. This is the only way through, and there's a wide open door over here. But I have to back off from banging into the window to say, wait a minute, let me get a larger perspective. What else is going on? So that's what we're here to do. Simultaneously live in the relative and the absolute. Let's play. So this week, 2 spiritual practices. Number 1, take an aspect of your life that feels really tied up in the relative, that feels constricted or bound, and take a breath around it and ask your inner wisdom to reveal the absolute, the divine flowing in this situation so that you can see and feel it. Not just as, oh, it's a nice idea. I know God's here somewhere. That's spiritual bypass. No, so that you can actually experience it. Ernest Holmes used to say that if you pray for your lower blood pressure, but refuse to go and check your blood pressure, you don't really believe your prayer. It's when you pray for the lower blood pressure and then you will check it and see the lower blood pressure that it builds the prayer. So that first thing is to pray for the absolute showing up in this situation so that you can experience it in your human form. That's the first practice. And then the second one is to take an aspect of the divine. I talk about this a lot. Troward's 7 aspects of God: life, love, light, power, peace, beauty, and joy. Take one of those aspects and contemplate it with a willingness to let it express more fully in, through, and as your life. Are you willing to do those 2 this week? To play with those 2 this week? Some of you said yes. I'm going to close with before I close with that, Buffy sent me a text message this morning saying Richard Rohr's reading and my talk seemed to be kind of aligned, and I thought so too. So I want to close with this little thing about contemplation. And he says, contemplation is about seeing, but a kind of seeing that is much more than mere looking, because it also includes recognizing and thus appreciating. The contemplative mind does not tell us what to see. See, most of the time we're looking at stuff and our mind is already telling us what to see. I know that I expect to see a blue chair there. Okay? But the contemplative mind does not tell us what to see, but teaches us how to see what we behold. It moves us past the expectation and into saying, can I really see and be present with what is? So the closing quote, it's a bit of a long one, is also, this whole series of talks I'm doing this month are taken from the 1958 talks that Ernest Holmes delivered at Asilomar, just in case you want to kind of read his take on all this. I'm not doing his version of all of it, because Buffy and I went through that class together, and I think 1 or 2 other people did, and there's times where it's rather obtuse and dry. I don't like to be too obtuse, and I don't like to be dry. I like to be moist. That's why I live in the Northwest, where we're always moist. All evolution is something that takes place where time is a plaything of the timeless, where the freedom is so great that we may deny the freedom and, by freedom, hold ourselves in bondage, where the relative will stick us with its relativity until we see through that which we now look through as a glass darkly and behold absoluteness, the absoluteness of the relativity. Relativity will stick us, will get in our face until we finally say, wait, I got to see through this. I got to see through this. How many of you, and probably all your hands should be up, have been stuck by relativity at some point in time? Yeah? Yeah. It pinches, yeah. And he says, in the freedom of the bondage until at long last, wherever we look, whatever we see, shall declare the glory of God in the kingdom of heaven now. We're playing, this is the practice. Can we, in the midst of all this stuff, look through it, and see something greater that's present without denying the existence in the relative of what is? Can we also see that there's something more? And then can we say, if I want that something more, I have to open it up. Buckminster Fuller said, don't fight reality. That's pointless. If you want to change something, build a new structure that makes the old one obsolete. And we see currently, as we have seen for millennia, fighting reality. I don't like how it is. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to fight it. And by the way, I could have said the same thing 15 years ago. Okay? Just so we're clear. What we're being called to say is what really wants to be revealed here. What's the new structure that we want to build? What's the new way of being? So we have an affirmation. Say this with me, if you will, please. Since there is only one life, I must be in and...
Sorry, it went away for a second, but it's back.
Okay. Since there is only one life, I must be in and of that life, and it must flow through me. I say yes, and let it flow. Say it again. Since there is only one life, I must be in and of that life, and it must flow through me. I say yes, and let it flow. As Buffy says, I get my foot off the hose. Yes, so it is. Thank you.